when EDF hired me, they hadn't got a really clue what they wanted to do with me. They just wanted a senior trader. And they sort of said, well, can we get you on the coal desk? And I'm going, no, I just left a wind developer. And I said, oh, well. And this is like September 2003, so we're less than 2 years away. Yeah. They said, well, we've heard about this emissions thing. We don't know if there's anything in it, but we feel we should be looking into it. So perhaps you could do that. And this is a major power company.
Nobody was like the leading financial institution focused on the green markets. And with our background, many of the founders having been involved in SO2 and NOx trading and doing some of the first first carbon transactions. I think we did our first one in 1994. Wow. So it was a voluntary transaction.
So I spent about 3 months reading the Kyoto Protocol, the directive, talking to Steve Drummond and Lucy Mortimer most of the time because I'd run into them at a DEFRA working group.
We were in carbon very early, and we were a small firm, very successful in coal and other environmental markets and weather derivatives and other forms of energy. And so plowing all those profits back into carbon was pretty high risk. And we kept thinking it was going to happen, and the protocol was going to be approved, and emissions trading was going to be the greatest thing in the world. And, some of that came true.
And eventually I went back to EDF's management. I said, yeah, I think we need to do something. They said, well, you need to present to the management committee what we should be doing and why we should be doing it. So that's what I did. And from that, they gave approval for emissions trading to start. And that was in the days when it was like 12,000 tonnes was a big day. Yeah. And I think in December of 2003, I did my first emissions trade with Evolution.
You want standard terms in order that you can develop liquidity. As long as everyone's trading on the same basis, they're all trading the same thing, and therefore all the liquidity concentrates in one place. At the time, there were 3 competing trade associations trying to help their clientele accommodate emissions trading. There was IETA, who'd led the way, frankly, with their experiences from 2003 onwards. And then there were ISDA, the bank's favourite, and EFET, the European Energy Traders' favourite. And just getting them all to talk to each other to make sure all the terms were identical, so that if you bought on one and sold on the other, you didn't have any disconnects.
It wasn't just enough to be an intermediary in markets, but you had to be an infomediary. And information was really the key to the game. And understanding with the environmental markets, if you don't understand policy and regulatory developments and where it might be heading, et cetera, it really, you're not really adding much value in terms of just quoting a number.
In order to have something useful to tell our clients on a regular basis, we needed to gather information regularly. So we had an internal info gathering need. So we started trawling, web pages, and we had to hire a couple of people to do that. And we realized, okay, if we have this need, then everybody else has this need as well. So we started sending out a free news email, basically summarizing whatever others published in the whatever could influence the price of carbon, either short term or long term.
So back in the early days of the EU emissions trading scheme, one of the things that we had to be very careful about is the risk management, and without any time series data, so any history of prices, that became quite difficult, and we improvised looking at some of the fundamentals, and then over time, as we had 2 years worth of data, we were in a much stronger position to understand the risks that we were taking, and for that risk model to fit within the bank's existing infrastructure.
And we went to a number of those we anticipated would be the big traders and asked them, okay, you're going to trade this, what do you need? we will give you this fairly cheaply initially if you join us in developing it. As we had 9 or 10 of these either big emitters or financials join us in developing it, and we had like workshops underway and saying, well, this is how the trending analytics platform looks now. Is that sort of in the direction you think it should be? And that was very, very helpful because people, they gained an ownership feeling, and we did adjust it in the manner that these guys wanted. And of course, since they ended up, I think all of them being maybe among the top 20. So when they used it, then everybody else needed it as well. It's kind of a bandwagon.
Some of those markets, environmental markets, are created by the stroke of a pen. And because of that, there's a lot more risk. I mean, when we took a step back after the 2008 financial crisis and we looked at our business as a whole, we realized we probably had too much policy risk as a firm.
I remember one voice mentioning that we might actually have a need for some deep coffers because there could be a financial crisis around. And that happened both in 2007 and when we discussed this in 2010. So there was some foresight out there. I can say that because it wasn't me any of the times. And then I think there's always some interaction behind the scenes, and of course when Bloomberg acquired what was then New Energy Finance / New Carbon Finance, then I think the people at Thomson Reuters would start thinking, and so would we.
The original idea of the NER 300 was something that I'd helped put together.
Yes, I heard that.
And I actually remember one Sunday afternoon sitting at my kitchen table at home after I'd been asked by our Brussels office what could we say about this idea of extra allowances for CCS, of thinking, well, how would you structure that? What would you write? And so I remember writing out how it would work in a sort of a format that an MEP would cotton on to. Even as it crossed the line, it was looking like a 7 to 10 billion euro fund for CCS. And that lasted about 10 minutes because we entered into we headed out of 2008. The recession started to take hold. The realization that there was a surplus of allowance building in the market hit the market, and the price started falling, and it fell and it fell, and it sort of leveled out, I remember, at about 15 euros. We still thought, well, yeah, that's something that might work, although at 15 euros the whole NER concept started to fall apart, because even though you potentially had 4 or 5 billion euros of technology funding sitting there, 15 euros probably wasn't enough to actually run a CCS facility. In looking towards the future, where you might have another technology fund, and I know there's talk of a 400 million allowance fund or mechanism, that you somehow have to tailor it more to specific technologies and make sure that it delivers on the projects irrespective. So less leverage around the actual carbon price. And that, I think that's a challenge for going forward, is to find out, is to use allowances but somehow have less leverage around the carbon price. But that's difficult because they are the carbon price.
The political class in Europe has reaffirmed the firm support for this. I think that the fact that big institutions such as the World Bank, which I think is critical for the sustainability of the market in this very critical moment, are very, very supportive and increasingly supportive and active. So I think that critical moment has passed, and I think that we're now on an upswing. But I think there was, no kidding, I think there was a fairly dicey moment a couple of years ago.